Get your hands off me. Back up. Hey, watch it. You walked right into me.
You're doing so well. Just keep breathing through it. We're almost there.
The collision happened so fast that Melody Johnson didn't have time to turn away. One moment she was rushing down the crowded Brooklyn sidewalk, her hand pressed protectively against her swollen belly, her worn winter coat doing little against the biting November wind that cut through the fabric and chilled her to the bone. The next moment, she slammed into something solid, warm, and devastatingly familiar. Her canvas bag dropped from her shoulder, spilling across the wet pavement in a cascade of receipts, loose change, and the few dollar bills she had left until her next shift at the coffee shop. She gasped, stumbling backward, her other hand flying to her lower back where the constant ache had become her unwelcome companion over these past months. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking," she started, Anna already bending awkwardly despite the weight of being 8 months pregnant, making every movement a calculated effort. Her knees protested as she crouched, her belly nearly touching her thighs as she reached for her scattered belongings. Then she saw the shoes, expensive Italian leather, black and pristine despite the wet sidewalk, the kind that cost more than 3 months of her current rent in the cramped studio apartment in Bed-Stuy. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand froze halfway to a crumpled receipt. Slowly, as if moving through water, her gaze traveled upward. Perfectly tailored charcoal trousers, a black cashmere coat that she recognized because she'd been with him when he bought it, back when his closet had been her closet, when his world had been her world. Strong hands, one of which bore a small scar between the thumb and index finger on the right hand. The right hand. She knew before she reached his face. Some primal part of her had recognized him the instant their bodies collided, had known him on a cellular level that bypassed logic and fear, and the 8 months of carefully constructed distance she'd put between them. Jian-Quan stood frozen on the sidewalk, his dark eyes wide with something that looked like devastation. 8 months had changed him in ways that made Melody's heart clench despite everything. His black hair was longer than she remembered, swept back from his face in a style that made him look older, sharper. New lines bracketed his mouth and creased the corners of his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept well in months. He looked like her. Melody. Her name came out rough, it barely more than a whisper, his Korean accent wrapping around the syllables the way it always had, turning her ordinary American name into something that sounded like a prayer. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. For 8 months, she had lived in terror of this exact moment, had planned and replanned what she would do if he found her, had rehearsed 1,000 different scenarios in her mind during sleepless nights when the baby kicked and her thoughts spiraled. But all her preparations evaporated under the weight of his stare. His gaze dropped from her face, traveling down slowly, inevitably, to where her coat had fallen open, to where her hands still rested protectively over the pronounced swell of her abdomen, over the baby who chose that exact moment to kick hard against her palm as if sensing her panic. She watched the realization hit him, watched his expression shift from shock to confusion to something she couldn't quite name, something that looked dangerously close to hope, and that terrified her more than anything else could have. "No," she whispered, finally finding her voice even as it cracked. "No, Jian, I have to go." She bent quickly, ignoring the sharp protest in her back, the way her belly made it nearly impossible to reach the scattered contents of her bag. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the dollar bills, couldn't make her fingers close around the coins that glinted on the wet concrete. "Wait." Jean's hand shot out, not grabbing her, but hovering near her elbow, close enough that she could feel the heat of his palm through her thin coat. "Please, Melody, just wait." "I can't." The lie came automatically. Hadamar practiced. "I'm late for work." She had already finished her shift at the coffee shop 3 hours ago, was supposed to be heading home to collapse on her secondhand mattress and try to sleep despite the baby using her ribs as a punching bag. But she couldn't tell him that. couldn't give him any information he could use to find her again, to trace her back to the tiny studio that barely qualified as an apartment. How far along are you? The question was quiet, almost clinical, but she heard the tremor underneath it, heard the terrible hope and the equally terrible fear. That's none of your business. She managed to scoop up most of her belongings, shoving them haphazardly into her bag. Melody, please. His voice dropped lower. Just tell me how far along you are. She made the mistake of looking up at him then. His face had gone pale beneath his naturally tan complexion, his dark eyes fixed on her belly with an intensity that made her want to run. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like wonder, and it broke something inside her chest. 8 months, she heard herself say, watching him calculate, seeing the exact moment the math clicked into place. His jaw clenched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. His hands, which had been hovering uncertainly, curled into fists at his sides. 8 months pregnant, he said slowly. You left 8 months ago. She said nothing. Let him work through it. Let him come to whatever conclusion he needed to reach. Which means you got pregnant right before leaving. Or... His eyes narrowed as he recalculated, and she saw the wheels turning in his brilliant mind. She saw him piecing together a timeline she'd prayed he would never consider. Or you were already pregnant when you walked out. Still, she said nothing. Her silence was damning, and they both knew it. My God, he breathed. You knew. You knew you were carrying my child and you still left. You let me spend 8 months thinking you'd betrayed me, thinking you'd moved on, when all along you were pregnant with my baby. You don't know, she started, but he cut her off. Is it mine? The question hung in the freezing air between them. A taxi honked somewhere behind her. A group of college students laughed as they pushed past on the narrow sidewalk, jostling Melody and making her stumble. Jian's hand shot out to steady her, his grip firm on her elbow. Sornan, the touch sent electricity racing through her body, even as her mind screamed at her to pull away. No, she said firmly, the lie tasting like ash on her tongue. No, it's not yours. I'm with someone else now. His name is David. We're very happy. Something flickered across Jian's face too quick for her to read. Pain, maybe, or disbelief. He took a half step back, his hand dropping from her elbow. You moved on quickly, he said, his voice gone cold, flat. The warmth that had briefly lit his features when he first recognized her vanished completely, replaced by the mask she remembered all too well. You left 8 months ago, and you're 8 months pregnant. That means you got pregnant within days of leaving me? He paused, and she saw him recalculating again, saw the moment another, worse possibility occurred to him. Or, he said slowly, his eyes narrowing, you were already pregnant when you left. You were pregnant with my child, and you ran anyway. I told you, it's not... Don't lie to me, Melody. His voice was quiet but carried an edge that made her freeze. I can see it in your eyes. You were pregnant when you walked out. How far along were you then? A week? 2 weeks? Did you even know? She wanted to lie again, wanted to maintain the fiction of David, of moving on, of a life that didn't include Yan Quan and all the complicated, painful history between them. But her body betrayed her. Her hand moved unconsciously to her belly, a protective gesture she'd developed over the past months, and his eyes tracked the movement. You knew, he said, and it wasn't a question anymore. You knew you were carrying my baby, and you left anyway. You let me spend 8 months thinking the worst of you when you were alone and pregnant. I had my reasons, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. What reasons could possibly justify this? The coldness cracked, revealing the anger and hurt beneath. What could I have done that was so terrible you had to take my child and disappear? I can't do this. She straightened, one hand pressed against her lower back, where the ache had become a sharp pain. Not here. Not now. She turned to walk away, but the baby kicked again, harder this time, and she couldn't quite suppress the wince. Are you all right? Concern broke through his anger immediately. Melody, are you hurt? I'm fine. She took a step, then another, putting distance between them. Goodbye, Jian. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. Hey, Melody. She didn't turn around. If she turned around, if she saw his face again, she might break. She might tell him everything. About that night, about the mistake in the darkness, about the fear that had driven her away and kept her running. I will find out why you left, he said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of a promise. I will find out what happened, and when I do, we're going to have a very long conversation about our child. Our child. The words hit her like a physical blow. You can run again if you want, he continued, but I'll find you. And this time, I'm not letting you go without answers. Then she heard his footsteps moving in the opposite direction, the tap of expensive leather against wet concrete growing fainter and fainter. She stood frozen on the sidewalk until she couldn't hear them anymore. Until she was sure he was really gone. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Only then did she let the tears come, hot and fast down her cold cheeks. 8 months. She'd stayed hidden for 8 months, had built a fragile new life from nothing, had convinced herself she was safe. And in less than 5 minutes, everything had fallen apart. Melody walked the 8 blocks to her apartment in a daze, barely registering the cold that bit through her thin coat or the people who had to step around her slow, shuffling progress. Her mind kept replaying the moment of recognition, the shock in Jian's dark eyes, the way his gaze had fixed on her pregnant belly, like he was solving an equation he'd been working on for months. He'd figured it out. Of course he had. Jianquan hadn't built an empire by being slow or stupid. He knew the baby was his, knew she'd been pregnant when she left, knew she'd spent 8 months hiding from him while carrying his child. And now he would come looking for answers. Her apartment building was a 4-story walk-up with a temperamental heating system and neighbors who fought loudly at 2 in the morning. She'd been here for 6 months, the longest she'd stayed anywhere since leaving the penthouse. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she saved enough for something better, something safer. But the pregnancy had complicated everything. Medical bills had eaten through her meager savings. Her body had made it impossible to work the double shifts she'd been pulling at the coffee shop. She climbed the stairs slowly, her hand on the railing, pausing on each landing to catch her breath and let the cramping in her lower back ease. By the time she reached the 3rd floor, sweat had broken out on her forehead despite the cold, and the baby was doing gymnastics against her ribs. She fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking from the encounter. The lock finally gave and she stumbled inside, leaning back against the door as it closed behind her. The studio was small but clean, barely 400 square feet that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once. She tried to make it cozy with secondhand furniture from the thrift store and cheap prints she'd found at the dollar store, but it still felt temporary, like a place you stayed while waiting for your real life to begin. Melody dropped her bag on the kitchen counter that separated the cooking area from the rest of the room and collapsed onto her bed without bothering to take off her coat. Her whole body ached. She'd been on her feet for 8 hours at the coffee shop, and the collision with Yan had drained what little energy she had left. She pressed both hands against her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. A boy. She'd found out at the 20-week ultrasound, sitting alone in that sterile room, while the technician moved the wand across her stomach and pointed out features on the grainy black and white screen. When the technician had asked if she wanted to know the sex, Melody had said yes without thinking, hungry for any connection to the life growing inside her. A boy, Jian's son, and the child she'd been carrying when she walked out of their penthouse apartment on a cold March morning, leaving behind everything except the clothes on her back and the secret growing inside her. She'd been barely a week along when she left, so early that most women wouldn't have known yet. But she'd known. She'd taken 3 pregnancy tests over 2 days, had watched the positive lines appear with a mixture of joy and terror that had made her hands shake. She'd been planning to tell Jian, had been working up the courage, thinking maybe a baby would change things. Maybe a baby would soften him, would make him see that his overprotective control was suffocating her, would help him understand that she needed to breathe. Then she'd overheard the conversation that changed everything. She'd been coming back from the drugstore with more pregnancy tests, wanting to confirm what she already knew, needing to see those positive lines one more time before she told Jian about the baby. She'd let herself into the penthouse quietly, her mind already rehearsing how she would break the news. That's when she heard Jian's voice from his office. The door was cracked open, and she'd frozen in the hallway, her shopping bag dangling from her hand. "I don't care what she wants," Jian had said, his voice cold and hard in a way that made her blood run cold. "She doesn't leave this apartment without security. She doesn't see friends without me vetting them first. She doesn't make any major decisions without consulting me. Is that clear? A pause, someone responding, though she couldn't hear the other voice clearly through the door. Yes, next sir, Jean had continued. But respectfully, Mrs. Kwan is becoming increasingly unhappy with the restrictions. Mrs. Kwan, he was talking about her. My wife's happiness is my concern, not yours, John had snapped. Your job is to ensure her safety. If she tries to leave without permission, you stop her. If she argues, you call me immediately. She seems to think she has freedom, but she needs to understand that her freedom ended the day she married me. This is for her own good. Melody had stood in that hallway, one hand pressed against her still flat stomach, where a life had just begun, and realized she couldn't stay. Not just for herself, but for the baby growing inside her. She couldn't raise a child in a cage, couldn't let Jian's need for control extend to their son or daughter. Her couldn't bring a baby into a world where love looked like surveillance and protection felt like prison. So she'd waited until he left for a business meeting. She'd packed nothing but her wallet and phone, knowing that taking luggage would alert the security cameras, would give them time to stop her. She'd walked out wearing only the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she was pregnant, that she was running for two now. She'd been running ever since. Now lying on her second-hand mattress with her hand on her belly, Melody felt the weight of those 8 months crash down on her. The fear, the loneliness, the constant looking over her shoulder, waiting for the moment when Jean's resources and connections would finally track her down. That moment had come today on a crowded Brooklyn sidewalk, and she hadn't been ready for it. Etta would never have been ready for it. Sleep came fitfully that night. She woke at 3 a.m. from a dream where Jian was standing in her apartment, his face expressionless, telling her she belonged to him, and so did the baby. She woke again at 5 from contractions that turned out to be Braxton Hicks, false labor that made her panic until the cramping eased. By the time her alarm went off at 7, she felt like she'd been hit by a truck. She dragged herself to the coffee shop, arriving 15 minutes late for her morning shift. Teresa Martinez, her manager, took one look at her and frowned. You look terrible, mija, Teresa said, her warm brown eyes concerned behind the steam rising from the espresso machine. Are you feeling all right? Just tired, Melody managed, tying her apron around her expanded waist with difficulty. Honey, I'm fine. Melody, you're about to pop. Teresa wiped down the counter with sharp, efficient movements. Maybe you should take some time off before the baby comes. Rest up. I need the money. Melody pulled out her notepad to take orders, even though the morning rush hadn't started yet. I'll be fine, Teresa. I promise. But she wasn't fine. By the lunch rush, she was dizzy and nauseous, her back aching so badly she could barely stand. She dropped a tray of dishes, the crash echoing through the small shop, and Teresa sent her to the back room to sit down. That's it, Teresa said firmly, her Puerto Rican accent thickening the way it did when she was worried or angry. You're going home, and you're not coming back until after you have that baby. I'll still pay you for your scheduled shifts this week, but you need to rest. Teresa, I can't afford. I don't care what you can afford. Teresa's voice softened but remained firm. You're going to hurt yourself or the baby if you keep pushing like this. Go home, Melody. That's an order. So Melody went home, too exhausted to argue. She stopped at the corner bodega on the way, buying cheap staples that would stretch through the week: rice, beans, eggs, bread. The owner, Mr. Kim, rang up her purchases with sympathetic eyes but said nothing about the way her hands shook as she counted out exact change. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs back to her apartment, each step feeling like a mountain. An envelope was taped to her door. She knew what it was before she opened it. Had been expecting it, dreading it, trying to pretend it wouldn't come. Eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises due to unpaid rent. Melody stared at the paper in her hands, the words blurring together as tears filled her eyes. She was 3 months behind on rent. She'd been trying to catch up, had been putting every spare dollar toward the debt. But the medical bills from her prenatal care had eaten through her savings faster than she could replace them. The free clinic only covered so much. The ultrasounds, the blood tests, the visits to make sure the baby was developing properly, it all added up. And now she had 30 days to find somewhere else to live while 8 months pregnant and effectively out of work. She unlocked her door and went inside, the eviction notice still clutched in her hand. She sat on her bed, still wearing her coat, and let the reality of her situation crash over her in waves. She had no money, no job, no family to turn to. So her mother had died 5 years ago from breast cancer. Her father had left when she was 6, and she'd never tracked him down, never wanted to. No siblings, no cousins close enough to ask for help. She'd been so careful, so determined to make it on her own, to prove that she could survive without Yeon's money and control. But survival and actually living were two different things, and right now she was barely managing the first. The thought crept in like poison, tempting and terrible. She could call him. One phone call and all her problems would disappear. Jean would pay her rent, cover her medical bills, make sure she had everything she needed. He would wrap her in luxury and security, would give their son the best of everything. All she'd have to do was give up her freedom and go back to being his beautiful, controlled wife. No. She'd rather live in a shelter than go back to that cage. She'd rather struggle and scrape and fight for every dollar than return to a penthouse that felt like a prison, no matter how gilded. Melody spent the rest of the day looking at apartment listings online, her second-hand laptop balanced awkwardly on her knees as she sat propped against her pillows. The search grew more desperate with each passing hour as she realized there was literally nowhere she could afford. Every listing required first month, last month, and security deposit, a sum that might as well have been $1 million for all her ability to come up with it. Studios in worse neighborhoods than hers still wanted $2,000 up front. Rooms for rent required background checks and proof of employment. Nobody wanted to rent to an 8 months pregnant black woman with no job and an eviction on her record. That night, she lay in bed feeling the baby kick and cried silent tears that slid down her face and into her pillow. She'd thought she was strong enough to do this alone. She'd been so sure of it back in March when she walked out of that penthouse, her head high despite the fear churning in her stomach. She'd been wrong. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and panic. She tried to rest like Teresa had ordered, but rest was impossible when her mind wouldn't stop spinning through worst-case scenarios. Homeless shelters that wouldn't take her this late in pregnancy, giving birth alone in an emergency room, social services taking her baby because she had nowhere to live. On the 4th day, as she forced herself to go back to the coffee shop to pick up her paycheck, Teresa took one look at her and insisted on driving her home after her shift ended. "Have you been sleeping?" Teresa asked as they sat in her old Honda outside Melody's building, the engine running to keep the heat on. "Not really," Melody admitted. "And eating?" "When I remember." "Melody, honey." Teresa turned to face her fully, her round face creased with concern. "You can't do this to yourself. You need to take care of you and that baby. Do you have anyone who can help you? What about the baby's father?" The question made Melody's chest tighten. "He doesn't know." "Maybe it's time to tell him." Teresa's voice was gentle but firm. "Pride isn't worth your health, mija. It isn't worth putting that baby at risk." "It's not about pride." Melody looked out the window at the crumbling brick building that was no longer her home. Not really, not with an eviction notice counting down the days. "It's about survival. If I tell him, I'll lose everything." Teresa didn't understand. How could she? But she didn't push. She made Melody promise to call if she needed anything, then watched her climb the stairs to make sure she got inside safely. That night, Melody woke at 2 a.m. to pain so intense she couldn't breathe. Sharp, stabbing pain in her abdomen that made her curl into a ball and gasp for air. Not contractions. She knew what those felt like from the false labor she'd been having for weeks. This was something else. Something wrong. She managed to grab her phone from the nightstand with shaking hands and dial 911. The dispatcher's calm voice cut through her panic, asking questions, promising help was coming. Melody answered as best she could between waves of pain, one hand pressed against her belly, silently begging the baby to be okay. She heard sirens in the distance, growing closer, and prayed harder than she'd prayed in years. The paramedics arrived quickly, their efficient movements and calm voices cutting through her terror. They helped her down the 3 flights of stairs, one on each side supporting her weight as the pain came in waves. By the time they reached the street, the sharp stabbing had eased to a dull, throbbing ache. But her vision was swimming, and she felt like she might pass out. They loaded her into the ambulance. And one of the paramedics started taking her vitals while the other drove. The inside of the ambulance was bright and sterile and smelled like disinfectant. Blood pressure is 170 over 110, the paramedic announced, her voice tight with concern. She was a young woman, maybe 30, with kind eyes and quick hands. Possible preeclampsia. How far along are you? 34 weeks, Melody managed through gritted teeth. Any bleeding? No, just pain. They rushed her into Brooklyn Methodist Hospital straight to labor and delivery. Nurses swarmed around her the moment the ambulance doors opened, hooking her up to monitors, checking the baby's heartbeat, taking blood. Their movements were practiced and efficient, but Melody could see the concern in their faces. A doctor came in, a Korean woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and gentle hands that pressed against Melody's abdomen, checking for tenderness. Her name tag read, Dr. Patricia Chen. I'm Dr. Chen, she said, her voice calm and steady. You're showing signs of severe preeclampsia. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you have protein in your urine. We need to get it under control, but if we can't, we may need to deliver the baby tonight. It's too early, Melody whispered, fear closing her throat. He's not ready. 34 weeks is early, but babies born at 34 weeks do very well with proper care, Dr. Chen said gently. Right now, my concern is keeping both of you alive. Do you understand? Melody nodded, too scared to speak. They gave her medication to lower her blood pressure and magnesium sulfate to prevent seizures. The pain gradually eased, replaced by a strange, disconnected feeling, like she was floating slightly outside her body. They kept her overnight for observation, and by morning her blood pressure had stabilized enough that Dr. Chen agreed to hold off on delivery. But you're on bed rest from now until delivery, Dr. Chen said firmly, standing at the foot of Melody's hospital bed with her chart. Complete bed rest, no work, no stairs if you can avoid them, minimal physical activity. Someone needs to be checking on you regularly. Do you have anyone who can help you? I'll figure something out, Melody said, because what else could she say? That she had nobody? That she was about to be evicted and homeless? That the baby's father didn't even know he existed? This isn't optional, Melody. Dr. Chen's voice was stern now, the kind voice of before replaced by the no-nonsense tone of a doctor who'd seen too many women not take preeclampsia seriously. If your blood pressure spikes again, we'll have no choice but to deliver. And next time, we might not catch it in time. Do you have family? Friends? The baby's father? No family, Melody said quietly. My boss checks on me. That'll be enough. Dr. Chen looked skeptical, but she signed the discharge papers anyway. Before leaving, she squeezed Melody's hand. Take care of yourself. That baby needs you healthy. Teresa came to pick her up from the hospital, took one look at the discharge instructions and shook her head firmly. You can't go back to that apartment, Teresa said as they sat in her car in the hospital parking lot. 3 flights of stairs? No way, you're coming to stay with me. Teresa, I can't impose. You're not imposing. I've got a spare room, and I work from home half the week anyway. I can keep an eye on you. Teresa started the car, making it clear the decision was already made. Don't argue with me, mija. You scared 10 years off my life when that hospital called me as your emergency contact. So Melody found herself installed in Teresa's spare bedroom in Queens, surrounded by kindness she didn't deserve and hadn't asked for. Teresa brought her meals 3 times a day, checked her blood pressure with a home monitor twice daily, and made sure she stayed horizontal as much as possible. But it couldn't last. On the 3rd day, Teresa got a call that her mother in Florida had fallen and broken her hip. She needed to fly out immediately. I'm so sorry, Teresa said, already pulling her suitcase from the closet and throwing clothes into it with shaking hands. My sister is a mess, and Mom needs someone there who can handle the medical stuff. I'll only be gone a few days, maybe a week. Will you be okay? I'll be fine, Melody assured her, even though her heart was sinking. Go take care of your mom. I promise I'll be careful. Call someone if you need help, Teresa insisted, pausing in her packing to grip Melody's shoulders. Promise me. Don't try to tough this out alone. I promise. Teresa left that evening, catching a red-eye flight to Tampa. Melody lay in the quiet apartment, listening to the sounds of the city through the window, sirens, car horns, the distant rumble of the subway, and felt the loneliness crash over her like a wave. She was alone again, completely, utterly alone, with a baby who could decide to come at any moment, and a body that was trying to betray her. That night, she had a dream that wasn't quite a nightmare but hurt worse than one. She was back in the penthouse, newly married to John, lying in their massive bed and watching him sleep. In the dream, she reached out and touched his face, traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. He'd opened his eyes and smiled at her. A real smile, soft and unguarded. The smile he saved only for her in those early days before everything got complicated. "I love you," Dream John had said, pulling her close. "More than anything. I'll keep you safe. I promise." She woke crying, her hand pressed against her belly. We're missing something that had been real once but had turned toxic. The real Gian had loved her. She'd never doubted that. But his love had become a prison. His promises of safety had become bars on a cage. She'd left before she could tell him about the baby, had run before she could see whether a child would have changed him or made him worse. The next morning, she woke to cramping. Not severe, just uncomfortable but persistent. She tried to ignore it, tried to rest like the doctor had ordered. But by afternoon, the cramping had intensified. When she went to the bathroom, there was spotting. Not much, just a little, but enough to make her heart race with fear. She called the hospital with shaking hands. The nurse who answered listened to her symptoms and told her to come in immediately. Not an ambulance-level emergency, one but serious enough that she shouldn't wait. Melody called Teresa's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She was probably on the plane or dealing with her mother at the hospital in Florida. She tried again, left a message, but knew Teresa couldn't help her from 1,000 miles away. She called 911, but when she explained her situation, they told her it wasn't an emergency that warranted an ambulance. She should take a car service or taxi to the hospital. She had $18 in her wallet, not enough for a taxi from Queens to Brooklyn, not even close. She could take the subway, but the thought of navigating stairs and crowded platforms while cramping and spotting terrified her. She sat on the edge of Teresa's guest bed, her phone in her hand, staring at her contact list. There was only one person who could help her. One person who would drop everything and come, no questions asked. One person who had the resources to get her to the hospital safely. She should call anyone else. Should call a car service and figure out the money later. Should reach out to one of Teresa's neighbors or beg Mr. Kim at the bodega for a loan. Should do literally anything except what she was about to do. But the baby came first. Her pride, her fear, her need for independence. None of it mattered as much as making sure her son was safe. She scrolled through her contacts until she found it. The number she'd saved 8 months ago and sworn she'd never use. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Then she pressed it. He answered on the second ring. "Melody." The surprise in his voice was evident. He'd checked the caller ID, couldn't believe she was actually calling him. "I need help." Her voice cracked, tears already streaming down her face. "I'm bleeding. The baby, something might be wrong, and I need to get to the hospital, but I don't have money for a taxi, and I'm in Queens and give me the address." His voice had gone sharp, focused, all business. No questions about why she was calling after running from him, no demands for explanations, just immediate, efficient action. She told him Teresa's address, the words tumbling out in a rush between sobs. "Stay there," he commanded. "Don't move. I'm sending a car. It'll be there in 10 minutes. Gian, I don't. Just stay put and keep calm. The car is coming." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened slightly. "You're going to be okay, both of you." He hung up. Melody sat clutching her phone, trembling. 9 minutes later, there was a knock on Teresa's apartment door. She opened it to find a driver in a dark suit, professional and courteous, his face carefully neutral. "Mrs. Kwan," he said with a slight bow, "I'm here to take you to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital." She didn't correct the name, just grabbed her bag and let him help her down the stairs. His touch was gentle but firm, supporting her weight without making her feel helpless. The car was a black Mercedes, sleek and expensive, the kind of vehicle Gian used for business. She slid into the back seat, and the driver pulled smoothly into traffic. "Mr. Kwan asked me to tell you he's meeting you at the hospital," the driver said, his eyes on the road. "He's about 15 minutes behind us." "He doesn't need to come," Melody said, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "With respect, ma'am," the driver said quietly, "I don't think anything could keep him away." They made it to the hospital in 20 minutes, the driver navigating through Queens and Brooklyn traffic with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. He helped her inside, staying with her until a nurse came to take her to labor and delivery, only leaving once she was safely in medical hands. She was settled into a room and hooked up to monitors when Jean arrived. He looked like he'd run the whole way despite having a car. His hair was disheveled, his tie loose, his face pale beneath his tan. He stopped in the doorway of her room, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning her from head to toe as if checking for visible injuries. "Is she all right?" he asked the nurse before Melody could say anything. "Is the baby all right?" "We're monitoring her now," the nurse said calmly, a middle-aged black woman with gentle hands and a no-nonsense demeanor. "The doctor will be in shortly." Jean moved into the room, stopping a few feet from her bed like he was afraid to get closer, like he thought she might bolt if he came too near. "You called me," he said quietly, and there was something raw in his voice, something vulnerable that she'd never heard before. "I didn't have anyone else," Melody admitted, because there was no point in lying. "Not now, not here. I don't care why you called." He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up even more. "I'm just glad you did. How bad is the pain? How much bleeding?" "Not much bleeding, just spotting. The cramping is better now." She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Don't." His voice was firm. "Don't apologize for calling me when you needed help. That's—" He broke off, seeming to struggle for words. "That's what I should have been there for all along." Dr. Chen came in then, pulling the curtain slightly for privacy as she examined Melody. Her face was serious but not panicked as she checked the monitors and pressed gently against Melody's abdomen. "Your blood pressure is elevated again, but not critical," Dr. Chen said, making notes on her chart. "The spotting appears to have stopped. The baby's heartbeat is strong." She looked up, her gaze moving between Melody and Jean. "You're very lucky, but Melody, you can't be alone anymore. Not with preeclampsia this severe. You need someone checking on you constantly. If your blood pressure spikes again, or if you start having symptoms, you need to be able to get help immediately." "I'll figure something out," Melody started, but Jean cut her off. "No, she won't." His voice was firm, decisive, the voice of a man used to solving problems. "She's coming home with me. I have a penthouse with an elevator, full-time staff, and I work from home. She'll have round-the-clock care." "Jean, no!" Melody tried to protest, but Dr. Chen was already nodding. "That sounds ideal," Dr. Chen said. "As long as you're willing to follow the care plan I'll set up." "She'll be safe with me," John said, his eyes never leaving Melody's face. "I'll make sure she follows every restriction, attends every appointment, has everything she needs." Dr. Chen looked at Melody. Is this acceptable to you, Melody? I need to know you're comfortable with this arrangement." She wanted to say no, wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, to keep running, but the cramping had scared her. The spotting had terrified her. The thought of being alone in Teresa's apartment when her blood pressure spiked again, with no one to call for help, with the baby's life depending on her getting to a hospital in time, it was too much. "Just until the baby comes," she heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'm leaving." "Agreed," Jian said immediately. "Whatever you want. Just let me help you until he's born safely." Dr. Chen kept her overnight for observation. Jian stayed in a chair beside her bed, refusing to leave even when she told him to go home and get rest. She woke several times during the night to find him still there, sometimes sleeping but mostly just watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. In the morning, Dr. Chen discharged her with strict instructions and a warning that they might need to induce labor early if her condition worsened. Jin had already arranged everything. A car waited outside to take them to his penthouse. His assistant had picked up her things from Teresa's apartment. Not much, just a small bag of clothes and toiletries. The penthouse was exactly as she remembered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, the city spread out below like a glittering carpet. Minimalist furniture in blacks and grays, expensive art on white walls. Everything sleek and modern and perfectly controlled. The guest room had been prepared for her, and the bed was made with soft white linens that probably cost more than a month of her old rent. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstand. Her few belongings had been unpacked and put away. "You don't have to stay in the guest room," Jian said carefully, standing in the doorway, like he was afraid to enter her space uninvited. "The master bedroom is yours if you want it, It's still, everything is still the same. I haven't changed anything. The guest room is fine, Melody said, because she couldn't handle the thought of sleeping in their old bed, surrounded by memories of when things had been good between them. All right, he nodded, accepting her boundary without argument. I've hired a nurse to check on you during the day. She'll be here at 9 tomorrow morning. If you need anything at night, anything at all, my room is just down the hall. Hey, don't hesitate. Thank you, she said quietly, and meant it despite everything. He lingered in the doorway like he wanted to say more. Finally, he spoke. I know you don't trust me. I know you have every reason not to. But I meant what I said at the hospital. You're safe here, both of you. I won't try to keep you here after the baby's born. If you want to leave, you can leave. But for now, please just rest and let me take care of you. She nodded, too tired to argue, too overwhelmed by the last 24 hours to do anything but accept what he was offering. He left, closing the door softly behind him, and she lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The nurse arrived the next morning as promised. Her name was Patricia Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen at the hospital, she explained with a warm smile. And she was a middle-aged Chinese-American woman with efficient movements and a gentle manner that immediately put Melody at ease. Patricia checked Melody's blood pressure, took her vitals, and made sure she was eating properly. Your blood pressure is still high but stable, Patricia said, noting the numbers in her chart. We'll keep monitoring it closely. Are you feeling all right? Any pain, dizziness, vision changes? No, Melody said. Just tired. That's normal. Rest as much as you can. Patricia packed up her equipment. I'll be back tomorrow morning at the same time. If anything changes before then, you have my number. Don't hesitate to call. Gene kept his distance for the first few days. He worked from his home office, came out for meals, checked on her briefly in the evenings. He was polite, or careful, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. It was so different from the man she'd left that she didn't know what to make of it. On the fourth day, she woke to voices outside her door, Jian and someone else, speaking in rapid Korean. She'd picked up enough of the language during their marriage to catch the gist. They were arguing about something, but she couldn't make out what. Then silence. A few minutes later, Jean knocked on her door. Come in, she called, pushing herself up to sit against the headboard. He entered carrying a folder, his expression troubled in a way she hadn't seen since she'd arrived. I need to talk to you about something, he said quietly. About why you left. Her heart started racing. I don't want to talk about that. I know, but I need you to hear this. Please. He sat in the chair near her bed, the folder resting on his lap. After you left, I was angry, hurt. I couldn't understand why you just disappear without explanation, so I had people investigate. I thought maybe someone had threatened you, or you'd gotten into some kind of trouble. Jian, please, let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. He opened the folder. What they found was this: documents showing that someone had been feeding you information designed to make you afraid of me. Edited recordings of conversations taken out of context. Fake incident reports about my business dealings. Someone wanted you to leave, and they manipulated you into doing it. Melody stared at him, her mind spinning. What are you talking about? The conversation you overheard, he said quietly. The one about restricting your movements, and about controlling your life. It was real, but it wasn't about you. It was about my mother. Your mother? The words came out as barely a whisper. She'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. She kept trying to leave her apartment alone and getting lost. I'd hired security to keep her safe, to make sure she didn't wander off or get hurt. That conversation you heard was me giving instructions about her care, not yours. Melody felt the room tilt. No, that doesn't make sense. He said Mrs. Kwan. He was talking about me. My mother is also Mrs. Kwan, Jean said gently, and the conversation was deliberately staged where you would overhear it by someone who wanted you to think I was trying to control you. Someone who had access to our apartment, who knew your schedule, us who could manipulate situations to plant doubt in your mind. He pulled out papers from the folder and held them out to her. Someone who had every reason to want you gone. Who? The question came out hoarse. My cousin Yuna. His jaw clenched. She'd been in love with me since we were teenagers. When I married you, when I married a black woman instead of the Korean woman my family expected, she saw you as an obstacle. So she started working on you slowly. feeding you doubts, making you afraid. When that didn't work fast enough, she staged that conversation for you to hear. Melody's hands were shaking as she took the folder. Inside were phone records showing calls between Yuna and the household staff. Email records showing Yuna asking about Melody's schedule, about when Jian would be away. Security footage showing Yuna in their apartment on the days Melody had accidentally overheard conversations. There were transcripts too. The real conversation about Jian's mother, time-stamped and dated. Another transcript showing Yuna coaching the security guard on exactly what to say, how to make it sound like the restrictions were about Mrs. Kwan, the wife, not Mrs. Kwan, the mother. It was all there, everything. Evidence of a manipulation so careful, so calculated, that Melody had never suspected. Evidence that someone had weaponized her fears, had used her love for Jian against her, had driven her away deliberately. "I loved you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I loved you so much, and I thought you were trying to turn me into a prisoner." "I know," Jian said, his own voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry I gave you reasons to believe it might be true. I was overprotective. I did restrict your movement sometimes, but only because my world is dangerous and I was terrified of losing you. I never wanted to control you, Melody. I just wanted to keep you safe." "So Yuna made me think—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "She made you think I was a monster," Jian completed quietly. "And when you found out you were pregnant, you ran because you didn't want to raise a child in what you thought was a cage." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "But I never knew, Melody. You were pregnant when you left, and I never knew. If I'd known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you, to explain, to fix things between us. I found out just a few days before I left," Melody said through her tears. "I was going to tell you. I was so happy, so scared, so hopeful. And then I heard that conversation, and I thought if you were trying to control me, what would you do to our child? So I ran. And you've been alone this whole time?" His voice cracked. "Suffering alone, struggling alone, carrying my child alone because someone lied to you, and I was too blind to see it?" "Yes. God, Melody." He dropped his head into his hands. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. For not seeing what Yuna was doing. For making you feel unsafe. For letting you leave without fighting harder to understand why." She started crying then, all the fear and pain and loneliness of the past 8 months pouring out. Jin moved to sit on the edge of her bed and pulled her gently into his arms. She should have pushed him away, should have maintained her distance. But she was so tired, even when he was so warm, and for the first time in 8 months, she wasn't alone. When she could finally speak again, she asked, "What happened to Yuna?" His arms tightened around her slightly. "She's gone, out of our lives permanently. She won't bother us again." "You didn't—" Fear spiked through her. "I didn't kill her, if that's what you're asking," he said quietly. "But I made it very clear that if she ever comes near you or our son again, that will change." His hand moved to her belly, tentative, asking permission. She nodded and he pressed his palm against her. Almost immediately the baby kicked, and Jian's eyes went wide with wonder. "He's strong," he breathed. "He takes after his father," Melody said, and felt Jian's sharp intake of breath at the acknowledgement. They sat like that for a long time, his hand on her belly, her head on his shoulder, feeling their son move beneath his palm. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. The hurt was too deep, the misunderstanding too profound, the damage done by Yuna's manipulation too extensive. But it was a start. "I want to be there," Jian said quietly, breaking the silence. "When he's born, I want to be in the room, to see him take his first breath. Will you let me?" "Yes," Melody said without hesitation. "I want you there." "And after?" His voice was careful, cautious. "When you're healed and ready to leave. What happens then?" She pulled back to look at him, seeing the fear in his eyes, the hope he was trying to hide. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "We have a lot to work through, a lot of trust to rebuild. But maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe we can just take it one day at a time." "I can do that," he said immediately. "One day at a time." His hand was still on her belly, his expression soft in a way she hadn't seen in so long. "Does he have a name?" "I've been thinking about it," Melody said. "I wanted to wait until you could have input. If you want to." I want to, he said firmly. What were you considering? Something Korean, she said. Something that means strength or courage. He's going to need both of those things. Growing up biracial in a world that doesn't always accept mixed children. Jean was quiet for a moment, his thumb moving in small circles on her belly. Junho, he said finally. It means brave and heroic. And it was my grandfather's name. He was the strongest man I ever knew. He married a woman my great-grandparents didn't approve of. She was from a lower class. And he spent his whole life proving that love was more important than status or bloodline. Junho, Melody tested the name, feeling how it fit. I like it, but I want to give him an American middle name too. Something that represents my heritage, my culture. What did you have in mind? Malcolm, she said. After Malcolm X, for strength and pride in who he is, for never being ashamed of his black heritage. Junho Malcolm Kwan, Jian said slowly, reverently. Our son. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of peace. Melody rested, her blood pressure gradually stabilizing under Patricia's careful monitoring. Jian worked from home, always available if she needed anything but never hovering, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. And they ate meals together, talked carefully about neutral topics, slowly learning how to be around each other again. He told her about his work, the legitimate business ventures and the less legitimate ones. He didn't hide anything, didn't try to make himself look better than he was. He dealt in information, in protection, in services that existed in gray areas of the law. He had power and money and connections that reached into every corner of New York's underworld. He protected people who couldn't protect themselves, he said, punished people who deserved punishment. He existed in the spaces where the law couldn't or wouldn't reach. I know what I am, he said one evening over dinner. I'm not a good man by most people's standards, but everything I do with purpose. Does that include what you did to Yuna? Melody asked, pushing rice around her plate. Yes. His answer was immediate, unapologetic. The law wouldn't have touched her for what she did. Emotional manipulation isn't illegal. Driving someone away through lies and deception isn't a crime the police would investigate. But what she did to us, to our family, deserved consequences. So I gave her a choice. Disappear and start over somewhere far from here, or face me. And she chose to disappear? With money enough to survive, but not enough to be comfortable. She'll have to work for the first time in her entitled life. Consider it character building. Melody should have been disturbed by the cold calculation in his voice. Instead, she felt a savage satisfaction. Yuna had destroyed their marriage, had separated a father from his unborn child, had caused 8 months of suffering and fear. Whatever Jean had done to her, she'd earned it. Thank you, Melody said quietly, for dealing with her, for believing me, for everything. You don't have to thank me. This is what family does. He paused, then added carefully, family. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. They weren't just 2 people anymore. They were about to become 3. Whether they stayed together or separated after the baby was born, they would always be connected by their son. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after moving into the penthouse, Melody woke to wetness between her legs. Not spotting this time, her water had broken. She felt the first contraction hit, a tight band of pressure wrapping around her belly, and knew it was time. Jian, she called out, trying to keep her voice calm even as her heart raced. Jian, it's happening. He burst into her room 30 seconds later, barefoot and shirtless, his hair sticking up like he'd been sleeping. His eyes were wild with panic that disappeared the instant he saw her sitting up in bed, one hand on her belly. The baby, he asked, already reaching for his phone. My water broke. We need to go to the hospital. He transformed instantly from sleepy to focused. He grabbed his phone, made calls while helping her stand, his movements efficient despite the adrenaline she could see coursing through him. A car was already waiting downstairs by the time they made it to the elevator. Jean had a bag packed for her, had been ready for this moment for weeks. The drive to Brooklyn Methodist took 20 minutes. Contractions were coming every 7 minutes, manageable but intensifying. Yes, Jean held her hand in the back seat, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm, his voice steady and calm, even though she could feel the tension radiating from him. You're doing great, he murmured. Just breathe through them. We're almost there. They rushed her into labor and delivery, and Dr. Chen was already there, calm and professional as always. They checked her, and she was 4 centimeters dilated, moving quickly for a first baby. "Looks like Junho is ready to meet his parents," Dr. Chen said with a smile. "How are you feeling about pain management?" "Epidural," Melody said immediately. "Definitely epidural." The anesthesiologist came, placed the epidural with practiced efficiency, and the pain faded to manageable pressure. Jin never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, Wen whispered encouragement in both English and Korean. When she was fully dilated and it was time to push, he moved to support her back, his arms around her, lending her his strength. "You can do this," he murmured in her ear, his voice low and intense. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived 8 months alone with our child. You built a life from nothing. You can do anything." She pushed and pushed and pushed. The pain was incredible even with the epidural, a pressure so intense she thought she might break. But Jan's arms were around her, and Dr. Chen was coaching her through each contraction. And somewhere in the midst of it all, she heard a sound. Crying, high and angry and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Dr. Chen announced unnecessarily, holding up a tiny, furious, absolutely beautiful baby. "Ernie, congratulations." They placed him on Melody's chest, this tiny person she'd carried for 8 months, and she felt her heart crack open. He was so small, barely 5 pounds because he'd come early, with a shock of black hair and tiny fists waving in the air. His eyes were squeezed shut, his mouth open in outrage at being forced into the cold world. "Hi, baby," Melody whispered through her tears. "Hi, Junho. I'm your mom." "And I'm your dad," Jian added, his voice breaking. He was crying too, silent tears sliding down his cheeks as he stared at their son. "We're your parents, and we love you so much." Junho stopped crying at the sound of their voices, his tiny face scrunched up, his eyes trying to open, responding to the voices he'd been hearing for months through Melody's belly. And Melody looked up at Jian and found him staring at her with an expression of such profound love and wonder that it took her breath away. "We made him," Jian said softly, one hand reaching out to touch Junho's tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around Jian's thumb, gripping tight. "We made this perfect person." "We did," Melody agreed, and in that moment, everything else fell away. The pain, the fear, the 8 months of separation. There was only this, their son finally here, finally safe, finally theirs. They let her hold Junho for a few minutes before taking him to be weighed and measured. 5 pounds, 2 ounces, 18 inches long. Perfectly healthy despite being a few weeks early. The nurses cleaned him up, wrapped him in a blue blanket, and brought him back. "Who wants to hold him first?" the nurse asked. "Ishon Chan," Melody said without hesitation. "Let his father hold him." The nurse placed Junho in Jian's arms, and he went completely still, like he was afraid to move and break the spell. He stared down at his son with an expression of absolute awe, his dark eyes wet with tears that kept falling. "Hello, Junho Malcolm," he whispered. "I'm your Appa." He looked up at Melody, his eyes still streaming. "Thank you. Thank you for him. Thank you for surviving these 8 months. Thank you for calling me when you needed help. Thank you for letting me be here for this." "Where else would you be?" Melody asked softly. "He's your son." "I know. But after everything I did, everything I failed to do, you would have been justified in keeping him from me. You would have been within your rights to shut me out completely. But you didn't. Why, even after 8 months apart, even after all the pain and misunderstanding, you let me be here for this. That's a gift I'll never deserve." They moved her to a recovery room a few hours later. Junho was in the nursery being monitored since he was a few weeks early, but he was doing well. Jean had pulled strings to get Melody a private room with a couch that converted to a bed, and he'd already announced his intention to stay. "You should go home," Melody said as evening approached, exhaustion pulling at her. "Get some real sleep in an actual bed. I'm not leaving, not tonight, not while you're here." He settled onto the couch, testing its comfort. "I'll sleep here. I won't bother you, but I need to be here. I need to know you're both safe." She was too tired to argue. She fell asleep within minutes, her body exhausted from labor, and when she woke in the middle of the night, Jean was sitting in the chair next to her bed, wide awake, watching her sleep. You're supposed to be resting, she murmured. I will. I just wanted to make sure you were okay first. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Melody, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said 8 months ago, before everything fell apart. Something I should have said every day we were together. What? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. I love you. The words were quiet but steady, carrying a weight that made her breath catch. I've loved you since the day we met. I loved you when we got married. I loved you when you left, even though I didn't understand why. I loved you every single day you were gone, even when I thought you'd betrayed me. And I love you now even more than before, because now I understand what I almost lost. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm just telling you that you're loved. You and Junho, you're both loved completely and unconditionally, no matter what you decide when you're ready to leave here. Melody felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I never stopped loving you, she whispered, even when I thought you were trying to control me. Even when I was running, even when I was so angry I could barely breathe, I never stopped. I just didn't know if love was enough. Is it enough? His voice was barely audible, like he was afraid of the answer. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I want to find out. Not right now. I'm not ready to make decisions right now, but maybe in a few weeks. When I'm healed and we've had time to figure out how to be parents, maybe then we can talk about what comes next. I can wait, Jian said immediately. I'll wait as long as you need. They brought Junho back at 6 in the morning for feeding. Melody tried to breastfeed, but he was small and sleepy and had trouble latching. The lactation consultant came, patient and kind, and eventually Junho figured it out. Watching him nurse, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger, Melody felt a surge of fierce, protective love so intense it hurt. He's perfect, Jian said softly from his chair, watching them with wonder in his eyes. Absolutely perfect. He is, Melody agreed. We did good. You did good. I just contributed genetic material. You grew him, carried him. I kept him safe when I didn't even know he existed. And now we keep him safe together, Melody said, and watched hope bloom across Jian's face. They kept them in the hospital for 3 days since Junho was early, and they wanted to monitor him. He gained weight instead of losing it, passed all his tests, and proved he could regulate his temperature and breathing on his own. On the morning of discharge, Yan arrived with a car seat already installed in the Mercedes and 6 different outfits for Junho to wear home. I didn't know what to get, he admitted, holding up tiny onesies with serious concentration. So I bought 6 different options and let the nurses pick. Melody laughed, the sound feeling strange and wonderful. When was the last time she'd laughed? Months ago, maybe longer. But looking at Jian holding up tiny baby clothes with complete focus, trying to make the perfect choice, she couldn't help it. They dressed Junho in soft blue cotton covered in little clouds. He looked impossibly tiny in the car seat, swallowed by the straps and padding designed for bigger babies. The drive back to the penthouse was nerve-wracking, every bump and turn making Melody's heart race. But they made it safely, and Jian carried the car seat up like it contained the most precious cargo in the world, which it did. The penthouse had been transformed while they were at the hospital. The guest room where Melody had been staying now contained a crib, a changing table, a rocking chair, and shelves full of baby supplies. Everything was soft and neutral, done in creams and grays and blues. A mobile hung over the crib with little animals that played a gentle melody when you wound it up. When did you do all this? Melody asked, staring around the nursery in amazement. While you were in the hospital, Jian said, setting the car seat down gently. I wanted it ready for when you came home. He paused, then added carefully, I hope it's okay. If you don't like anything, we can change it. It's perfect, Melody said, her throat tight. It's all perfect. Those first few days were a blur of feeding and diaper changes and exhaustion. Junho ate every 2 hours, which meant no one slept for more than 90 minutes at a time. Melody was sore and tired and overwhelmed by the reality of keeping a tiny human alive. But she wasn't alone. Jian was there for every feeding and learning how to change diapers with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Rocking Junho when he cried, figuring out how to be a father in real time. He made mistakes, held Junho too carefully at first, like he might break. then had to learn to be firmer when the baby needed burping. But he learned quickly, and he never complained, never acted like caring for his son was beneath him. One night, about a week after coming home, Melody woke at 3 in the morning to silence. Panic flooded her immediately. Why wasn't Junho crying? Was he breathing? Was he okay? She threw off her covers and rushed to the nursery, her heart pounding. She found Jian sitting in the rocking chair, shirtless, with Junho asleep on his bare chest. He was singing softly in Korean, a lullaby she vaguely recognized from when his mother used to hum it years ago. His hand covered most of Junho's tiny back, moving up and down with each breath. He was fussing, Jian whispered when he noticed her in the doorway. I didn't want him to wake you. The skin-to-skin seems to help him settle. Melody's heart melted. This man, this dangerous man who ran an empire from the shadows, who inspired fear in his enemies and commanded respect from everyone around him, was sitting in a rocking chair at 3 in the morning, singing lullabies to their son, and he looked happier than she'd ever seen him. You're going to be a good father, she said softly. I'm going to try, he said quietly. He deserves the best. You both do. She went back to bed but couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about choices and second chances. Thinking about the life she'd built alone versus the life they could build together. Thinking about Junho and what he deserved. Not just material things, but love and stability, and parents who chose each other every day. A few days later, Patricia came for a postpartum checkup. She examined Melody, checked her incision from where they'd had to make a small cut during delivery, and asked about her emotional state. How are you feeling mentally? Patricia asked, making notes on her chart. Any signs of postpartum depression or anxiety? Intrusive thoughts? I'm tired, Melody admitted. Overwhelmed sometimes. But I think that's normal, isn't it? It is, Patricia confirmed. But I want you to know the signs to watch for anyway. If you start feeling hopeless, or like you can't bond with the baby, or have thoughts of hurting yourself or him, you call me immediately, understood? Understood. And your living situation? You have support? You're not trying to do this alone? I have support, Melody said. Junho's father is here. He's been amazing, actually. Good, that makes a huge difference. Patricia packed up her equipment. You're healing well physically. Your blood pressure is back to normal. Just keep resting when you can, and don't try to do too much too soon. After Patricia left, Melody found Jian in the nursery, standing over Junho's crib and watching him sleep with that expression of wonder that still hadn't faded even after a week of sleepless nights and dirty diapers. We need to talk, she said quietly. He tensed immediately, and she realized he thought she was about to tell him she was leaving, that their temporary arrangement was over. Juri, okay? He said carefully. Let's go to the living room so we don't wake him. They settled on the couch, maintaining careful distance between them. Jian's hands were clasped tightly together in his lap, his jaw set, bracing himself for bad news. I've been thinking, Melody started, about what comes next, about what I want. Okay, he said again, his voice neutral even though she could see the tension in every line of his body. And I don't want to leave, she said, watching his face carefully. Not yet. Not until we've really tried to fix what broke between us. Hope flickered across his features, quickly suppressed like he was afraid to believe her. I want to go to counseling, she continued. Both of us, together and separately. I want us to learn how to communicate better, how to trust each other again. I want to understand why you were so overprotective, and I want you to understand why that terrified me. I want to build something new instead of trying to go back to what we had before, because what we had before wasn't working. You want to try again? The hope was breaking through now, evident in his voice. Really try? I want to try, Melody confirmed. Not for Junho, though he's part of it, but for us. Because despite everything, despite all the pain and misunderstanding and 8 months apart, I still love you, and I think you still love me. And maybe that's enough to build on. It's more than enough, Jian said immediately, his voice rough with emotion. It's everything. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand in both of his. I'll do whatever you need. SAR counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I'll be completely honest, even when it's hard. I'll respect your boundaries, even when my instinct is to protect you by controlling the situation. I'll be the partner you deserve. And I'll try to communicate better instead of running when things get hard, Melody said. I'll try to trust you even when it's scary. I'll give you the chance to prove you've changed. Thank you. His voice broke on the words. Thank you for this chance. I won't waste it. They found a therapist who specialized in couples counseling, a Korean-American woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, who understood the cultural dynamics of their relationship without judgment. The first session was hard. They talked about the conversation Melody had overheard, about Yuna's manipulation, what about Jean's need for control and Melody's need for freedom. You both have valid fears, Dr. Kim said, her voice calm and measured. Jean, your world is dangerous. Your need to protect Melody isn't irrational, but Melody, being protected shouldn't mean being imprisoned. The question is whether you two can find a middle ground where you both feel safe. It took time, weeks of sessions, of hard conversations, of learning how to fight fair and communicate clearly. Jian worked on loosening his grip, on asking instead of demanding, on trusting Melody to make her own choices even when it scared him. Melody worked on not running at the first sign of conflict, on speaking up before resentment built, on trusting that Yin's protection came from love and not a desire to control. Junho grew, 1 month old, then 2, then 3. He started smiling. Morai started following them with his eyes, started grasping at toys with his tiny hands. Watching Jian with their son was Melody's favorite thing. He was patient and gentle, singing Korean lullabies and talking to Junho in both languages, determined their son would grow up bilingual. But as Junho grew, something became increasingly apparent, something that made Melody's stomach clench with anxiety every time she noticed it. Junho looked like Jihan, not just a passing resemblance. He had Jihan's distinctive cleft chin, his specific eye shape, the widow's peak that marked the wrong twin. The features were unmistakable to anyone who knew both brothers. And while Junho also had Melody's beautiful brown skin, her full lips, her nose shape, the Korean features he'd inherited came from the twin who had violated her. 3 months after Junho's birth, Sejin's family came to meet the baby. It was unavoidable. They'd heard about the birth, about Melody's return, and demanded to see their grandson. Melody had been dreading it, but Jean had assured her he would handle his family. His mother arrived first. Mrs. Soonja Kwan swept into the penthouse wearing a traditional hanbok, her face carefully neutral as she looked at Melody holding Junho. The baby was awake, his dark eyes looking around with infant curiosity. So this is my grandson, Mrs. Kwan said in Korean, not bothering to greet Melody first. His name is Junho Malcolm Kwan, Jean said firmly, also in Korean, and you will greet his mother before you presume to hold him. Mrs. Kwan's lips thinned, but she turned to Melody with the barest nod. Melody. Mrs. Kwan, Melody replied coolly, her arms tightening protectively around Junho, and the older woman stepped closer, looking down at the baby. Melody watched her face carefully, saw the exact moment recognition hit. Mrs. Kwan's eyes widened slightly, her gaze moving from Junho's face to Melody's, then to Jian's. He looks like, she started in Korean. He looks like his father, Jian interrupted sharply. Me. But Mrs. Kwan's expression had changed, suspicion replacing the brief warmth that had appeared when she first saw the baby. Does he? Because I see. You see your grandson, Jian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. That's all you need to see. Other family members arrived, aunts, uncles, cousins, and Melody watched the same realization cross their faces, one by one. The whispers started in Korean, thinking she couldn't understand. Ma'am, he looks just like Jihan. Are you sure the DNA test was accurate? Maybe she was with both of them. One of John's aunts, emboldened by the others, spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Are you sure about that paternity test? He has Jihan's features exactly. And look at that skin. So dark. How do we know she wasn't with other men too? Other black men? The room went silent. Jian's face went cold in a way that made even his relatives take a step back. Get out, he said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. Get out of my home. All of you. Jian, we're just saying, his aunt tried. You're questioning my wife's fidelity and implying my son isn't mine, Jian said, his voice like ice. You're suggesting that because he has brown skin, he can't be a Kwan. Get out, now, before I have you removed. They left, his mother included, casting backward glances filled with judgment and suspicion. When the door closed behind the last of them, Jian turned to Melody. She was still sitting on the couch, Junho in her arms, tears streaming silently down her face. "I'm sorry," Jian said, moving to kneel in front of her. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that." "They think he's not yours," Melody whispered. "They think I was cheating. They looked at my baby and saw—" "They saw what small-minded racist people see," Jian interrupted gently. "They saw brown skin and decided it meant betrayal. They saw features that reminded them of Jihan and ignored the DNA test that proves Junho is mine. They are wrong, and they are no longer welcome in our lives." But the damage was done. Even after Jian's family left, Melody found herself looking at Junho differently. He's seeing Jihan's features mixed with hers, wondering if people would always question whether he was really Jian's son, wondering if Jian himself, in private moments, looked at their baby and saw his brother instead of himself. 2 weeks later, on a quiet evening when Junho was asleep in his crib, Melody finally voiced her fear. "Do you see him?" she asked Jian as they sat together on the couch. "When you look at Junho, do you see Jihan?" Jian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was honest in a way that hurt. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not always, but sometimes, when the light hits his face a certain way, or when he makes a particular expression. I see features that remind me of my brother." Melody's heart sank. "But," Jean continued, reaching for her hand, "I also see you. I see your strength in the way he grips my finger. I see your beauty in his skin, in his smile. I see my father in his determined little frown when he's hungry. And most importantly, I see Junho. Not me, not Jahan, not even just you and me combined. I see him, his own person, who just happens to have inherited features from both sides of his family. Your family thinks, my family is racist and small-minded," John said firmly. "They looked at our beautiful biracial son and saw a threat to their idea of bloodline purity. They saw brown skin and decided it was wrong. But they don't get a vote in our lives anymore. They don't get to poison our son with their prejudice." "But what about when he's older?" Melody asked, voicing the fear that had been growing inside her. "What about when he looks in the mirror and sees features that look like the man who hurt his mother? What if he asks questions? What if—" "Then we'll tell him the truth," Jane said quietly. "Age appropriately, of course. We'll tell him that before he was born, there was a misunderstanding that hurt both of his parents. We'll tell him that a man who looked like his appa did something wrong, but we'll also tell him that he is not that man. He is Junho Malcolm Kwan, and he is loved for exactly who he is." Melody wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love would be enough to overcome the visual reminder of trauma every time she looked at her son. But doubt crept in like poison. That night, Junho woke crying at 3 a.m. Melody went to his nursery, prepared to feed him, but found Jian already there. He'd picked up Junho and was holding him against his bare chest, swaying gently and singing softly in Korean. Melody stood in the doorway, watching, and as she watched, she saw something that made her breath catch. Jian was crying, silent tears streaming down his face as he held their son, his voice never wavering on the lullaby. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Junho in Korean, thinking Melody couldn't hear or understand. "I'm sorry you look like him and not more like me. I'm sorry my family is cruel. I'm sorry the world will judge you for having brown skin and Asian features. But I promise you, I promise I will love you every single day. I will teach you to be proud of both sides of your heritage. I will make sure you know that you are perfect exactly as you are." He pressed his lips to Junho's forehead. "You are not him. You could never be him. You are mine. You are ours. And nothing, not your features, not other people's opinions, not anything, will ever change that." Melody stepped into the room and Jian looked up. His face wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. "I heard you," she said softly. "Good," he said simply, "because I meant every word." She crossed to them and wrapped her arms around both of them, her son and the man who had chosen to be his father, not just in biology, but in every way that mattered. "I love you," she whispered against Jian's shoulder. "Both of you." "And we love you," Jian replied, his free arm pulling her closer. "Always." 6 months after Junho's birth, they renewed their vows. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and the few family members who had proven themselves worthy of being in their lives. For Teresa came from Queens, crying happy tears. Dr. Chen attended, beaming with pride at her healthy patience. Patricia brought a gift for Junho, a silver rattle engraved with his name in both English and Korean. Junho, almost 6 months old and starting to sit up on his own, served as ring bearer with help from Teresa. Melody wore white, a simple dress that hugged her postpartum curves. Jian wore a traditional black suit with a tie that had subtle African print woven into it. A gift from Melody, a symbol of honoring both their cultures. When they said their vows, they meant every word. "I promise to love you without caging you," Jian said, his voice steady and sure. "To protect you without controlling you. To be your partner in all things, the good and the bad. To listen when you speak. To trust your choices. To respect your freedom even when it scares me. I promise to choose you every day. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you're the best thing that ever happened to me. I promise to love you without running," Melody said, her own voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "To stay and fight when things get hard. To trust you even when it's difficult. To speak my truth instead of letting resentment build. I promise to choose you every day."